Okay, hello. I'm hoping that you can see me and hear me. I'm Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library. This is the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. This is the third attempt here at trying to get this thing to work, because for some reason it's not working, and I'm not sure why. Um, but hopefully you can see me, and we can take part in uh, this final reading, this War of the Worlds, the final two chapters, um, and it's kind of odd that the apparently the normal Facebook Live is not working right now, or something seems to be screwy with this, just because I had to switch. This is on my phone, so this is a slightly different venue here instead of my usual laptop that I use for my readings. But so if I hope everything's hunky dory. Um, I apologize for being a little late. If you are just catching up, we're having some technical difficulties, I guess. It wasn't working before, and I'm really hoping it's working now. Um, so maybe I should read real quickly, so that way, in case this thing poops out on me, I can get the final two chapters in before anything else happens. Um, okay, so we are reading War of the Worlds, and we have gotten down towards the end. We're getting near the end. In our last chapter, our protagonist, our unnamed narrator, is walking through London. He's looking at the destruction, and there's no people. There's no people. There's no Martians. There's some animals running around loose, and so he feels like he is alone in the world, and that's where it comes right now. He feels like he is alone in the world, and then he sees one of the Martian tripods, one of they have the fighting machines and the handling machines, and it has crashed into one of the buildings. It's literally just staying there unmoving, and he's starting to realize that there's, by the example of the carrion birds swarming around the hood, which is where the Martians sit in order to manipulate the controls to make the tripod work, that the Martians are dead. The Martians have died through no action on the human beings, but in fact by being unable to resist the bacteria and the germs that human beings have developed an immunity to over thousands of years, not millions of years. So our very nature, that we are the survivors. We are the ones who have survived all these years and are now the product of many years of becoming immune to the natural germs that are in the earth, and the Martians have not. So they have no resistance to any of these earth-born germs, and so it is killing them. They are dying, and at this point, and it's funny to me because the narrator sort of mentions this, although he doesn't really say how he knows this. My assumption is that since this is told after the fact, that he is relating what they discovered upon further examination later on, and that he is sort of filling in. Later on we would find out that it was the germs that killed the Martians, and so that's why they died. At the moment, now he's sort of observing that they're all dead, and that the machines are unmoving, and now he wonders what to do now. So, with that in mind, we will begin. There's our War of the Worlds. Looks like it's backwards for you guys. Chapter 9 is entitled Wreckage. And now comes the strangest thing in my story, yet perhaps it is not altogether strange. I remember clearly and coldly and vividly all that I did that day up until the time that I stood weeping and praising God upon the summit of Primrose Hill, and then I forget. Of the next 3 days I know nothing. I have learned since that, far from my being the first to discover the Martian overthrow, several such wanderers as myself had already discovered this on the previous night. One man, the first, had gone to St. Martin's-le-Grand, and while I sheltered in the cabman's hut, had contrived to telegraph to Paris. Thence the joyful news had flashed all over the world. 1,000 cities, chilled by ghastly apprehensions, suddenly flashed into frantic illuminations. They knew of it in Dublin, Edinburgh, Manchester, and Birmingham at the time when I stood upon the verge of the pit. Already men weeping with joy, as I have heard, shouting and staying their work to shake hands and shout, were making up trains even as near as Crewe to descend upon London. The church bells that had ceased a fortnight since suddenly caught the news until all England was bell-ringing. Men on cycles, lean-faced, unkempt, scorched along every country lanes, shouting of unhoped deliverance, shouting to gaunt, staring figures of despair. And for the food, across the Channel, across the Irish Sea, across the Atlantic, cornbread and meat were rushing to our relief. All the shipping in the world seemed to be going Londonward in those days. But of all this I have no memory. I drifted, a demented man. I found myself in a house of kindly people who had found me on the 3rd day wandering, weeping, and raving through the streets of St. John's Wood. They have told me since that I was singing some inane doggerel about the last man left alive, hurrah, the last man left alive. Troubled as they were with their own affairs, these people, whose name, much as I would like to express my gratitude to them, I may not even give here, nevertheless encumbered themselves with me, sheltered me, and protected me from myself. Apparently they had learned something of my story from me during the days of my lapse. Very gently, when my mind was assured again, did they break to me what they had learned of the fate of Leatherhead. 2 days after I was imprisoned, it had been destroyed, with every soul in it, by a Martian. He had swept it out of existence, as it seemed, without any provocation, as a boy might crush an ant-hill in the mere wantonness of power. I was a lonely man, and they were very kind to me. I was a lonely man and a sad one, and they bore with me. I remained with them 4 days after my recovery. All that time I felt a growing craving to look once more on whatever remained of the little life that seemed so happy and bright in my past. It was a mere hopeless desire to feast upon my misery. They dissuaded me. They did all they could to divert me from this morbidity, but at last I could resist the impulse no longer, and promising faithfully to return to them, and parting, as I will confess, from these 4-day friends with tears, I went out again into the streets that had lately been so dark and strange and empty. Already they were busy with returning people. In places even there were shops open, and I saw a drinking fountain with running water. I remember how mockingly bright the days seemed as I went back on my melancholy pilgrimage to the little house at Woking, how busy the streets, and vivid the moving life about me. So many people were abroad everywhere, busied in 1,000 activities. It seemed incredible that any great proportion of the population could have been slain. But then I noticed how yellow were the skins of the people I met, how shaggy the hair of the men, how large and bright their eyes, and that every other man still wore his dirty rags. Their faces seemed to show one of two expressions: a leaping exultation and energy, or a grim resolution. Save for the expression of the faces, London seemed a city of tramps. The vestries were indiscriminately distributing bread sent us by the French government. The ribs of a few horses showed dismally. Haggard special constables with white badges stood at the corner of every street. I saw a little of the mischief wrought by the Martians until I reached Wellington Street, and there I saw the red weed on the buttresses of Waterloo Bridge. At the corner of the bridge, too, I saw one of the common contrasts of that grotesque time: a sheet of paper flaunting against a thicket of the red weed, transfixed by a stick that kept it in place. It was the placard of the first newspaper to resume publication, the Daily Mail. I bought a copy for a blackened shilling I found in my pocket. Most of it was in blank, but the solitary compositor who did the thing that had amused myself by making a grotesque scheme of advertisement stereo on the back page. The matter he printed was emotional. The news organization had not yet found its way back. I learned nothing fresh except that already in 1 week the examination of the Martian mechanisms had yielded astonishing results. Among other things, the article assured me that I did not believe what I did not believe at the time, that the secret of flying was discovered. At Waterloo, I found the free trains that were taking people to their homes. The first rush was already over. There were few people in the train, and I was in no mood for casual conversation. I got a compartment to myself and sat with folded arms, looking grayly at the sunlit devastation that flowed past the windows. And just outside the terminus, the train jolted over temporary rails, and on either side of the railway, the houses were blackened ruins. To Chapman Junction, the face of London was grimy with powder of the black smoke in spite of 2 days of thunderstorms and rain. And at Chapman Junction, the line had been wrecked again. There were hundreds of out-of-work clerks and shopmen working side by side with the customary navvies, and we were jolted over a hasty relaying. All down the line, from there, the aspect of the country was gaunt and unfamiliar. Wimbledon particularly had suffered. Walton, by virtue of its unburned pine woods, seemed the least hurt of any place along the line. The Wandle, the Mole, every little stream was a heaped mass of red weed. In appearance, between the butcher's meat and pickled cabbage, the Surrey pine woods were too dry, however, for the festoons of the red climber. Beyond Wimbledon, within sight of the line, in certain nursery grounds, were the heaped masses of earth about the 6th cylinder. A number of people were standing about it, and some sappers were busy in the midst of it. Over it flaunted a Union Jack, flapping cheerfully in the morning breeze. The nursery grounds were everywhere crimson with the weed, a wide expanse of livid color cut with purple shadows, and very painful to the eye. One's gaze went with infinite relief from the scorched grays and sullen reds of the foreground to the blue-green softness of the eastward hills. The line of the London side of Woking Station was still undergoing repair, so I descended at Byfleet Station and took the road to Maybury, past the place where the artillerymen and I had talked to the hussars, and on by the spot where the Martians had appeared to me in the thunderstorm. Here, moved by curiosity, I turned aside to find among a tangle of red fronds the warped and broken dog-cart with the whitened bones of the horse scattered and gnawed. I stood staring at these vestiges. When I returned through the pine wood, neck high with the red weed, here and there to find the landlord of the spotted dog had already found burial, and so came home past the college arms. A man standing at an open cottage door greeted me by name as I passed. I looked at my house with a quick flash of hope that faded immediately. The door had been forced. It was unfastened and was opening slowly as I approached. It slammed again. The curtains of my study fluttered out of the open window from which the artilleryman and I watched the dawn. No one had closed it since. The smashed bushes were just as I had left them nearly 4 weeks ago. I stumbled into the hall, and the house felt empty. The stair carpet was ruffled and discolored where I had crouched, soaked to the skin from the thunderstorm the night of the catastrophe. Our muddy footsteps, I saw, still went up the stairs. I followed them to my study and found, lying on my writing table still, with the selenite paperweight upon it, the sheet of work I had left on the afternoon of the opening of the cylinder. For a space I stood reading over my abandoned arguments. It was a paper on the probable development of moral ideas with the development of the civilizing process, and the last sentence was the opening of a prophecy. Quote, "In about 200 years," I had written, "we may expect—" The sentence ended abruptly. I remembered my inability to fix my mind that morning, scarcely a month gone by, and how I had broken off to get my daily chronicle from the newsboy. I remembered how I went down to the garden gate as he came along and listened to his odd story of men from Mars. I came down and went into the dining room. There were the mutton and the bread, both far gone now in decay, and a beer bottle overturned, just as the artilleryman and I had left them. My home was desolate. I perceived the folly of the faint hope I had cherished so long, and then a strange thing occurred. "It's no use," said a voice. "The house is deserted. No one has been here these 10 days. Do not stay here to torment yourself. No one escaped but you." I was startled. Had I spoken my thought aloud? I turned, and the French window was opened behind me. I made a step to it and stood looking out. And there, amazed and afraid, even as I stood amazed and afraid, were my cousin and my wife. My wife, white and tearless, she gave a faint cry. "I came," she said. "I knew, I knew." She put her hand to her throat, swayed. I made a step forward and caught her in my arms. That is Chapter 9. Chapter 10 is entitled The Epilogue. I cannot but regret, now that I am concluding my story, how little I am to contribute to the discussion of the many debatable questions which are still unsettled. In one respect, I shall certainly provoke criticism. My particular province is speculative philosophy. My knowledge of comparative physiology is confined to a book or two, but it seems to me that Carver's suggestions as to the reason of the rapid death of the Martians is so probable as to be regarded almost as proven conclusion. I have assumed that in the body of my narrative, at any rate, In all the bodies of the Martians that were examined after the war, no bacteria except those already known as terrestrial species were found. That they did not bury any of their dead, and the reckless slaughter they perpetuated among us, points to an entire ignorance of the putrefactive process. But probable as this seems, it is by no means a proven conclusion. Neither is the composition of the black smoke known, which the Martians use with such deadly effect, and the generator of the heat rays remains a puzzle. The terrible disasters at the Ealing and South Kensington laboratories have disinclined analysts for further investigations upon the latter. Spectrum analysis of the black powder points unmistakably to the presence of an unknown element with a brilliant group of 3 lines in the green, and it is possible that it combines with argon to form a compound which acts at once with deadly effect upon some constituent of the blood. But such unproven speculations will scarcely be of interest to the general reader, to whom this story is addressed. None of the brown scum that drifted down the Thames after the destruction of Shepperton was examined at the time, and now none is forthcoming. The results of an anatomical examination of the Martians, so far as the prowling dogs had left such an examination possible, I have already given. But everyone is familiar with the magnificent and almost complete specimen in spirits at the Natural History Museum, and the countless drawings that have been made from it. Beyond that, the interest of their physiology and structure is purely scientific. A question of graver and universal interest is the possibility of another attack from the Martians. I do not think that nearly enough attention is being given to this aspect of the matter. At present, the planet Mars is in conjunction, but with every return to opposition, I, for one, anticipate a renewal of their adventure. In any case, we should be prepared. It seems to me that it should be possible to define the position of the gun from which the shots were discharged, to keep a sustained watch upon this part of the planet, and to anticipate the arrival of the next attack. In that case, the cylinder might be destroyed with dynamite or artillery before it was sufficiently cool for the Martians to emerge. Or they might be butchered by means of guns as soon as the screw opened. It seems to me that they have lost a vast advantage in the failure of their first surprise. Possibly they see it in the same light. Lessing has advanced excellent reasons for supporting that the Martians have actually succeeded in effecting a landing on the planet Venus. 7 months ago now, Venus and Mars were in alignment with the Sun. That is to say, Mars was in opposition from the point of view of an observer on Venus. Subsequently, a particular luminous and sinuous marking appeared on the unilluminated half of the inner planet, and almost simultaneously a faint, dark mark of a similar sinuous character was detected upon a photograph of the Martian disk. One needs to see the drawings of these appearances in order to appreciate fully their remarkable resemblance in character. At any rate, whether we expect another invasion or not, our views of the human future must be greatly modified by these events. We have learned now that we cannot regard this planet as being fenced in and a secure abiding place for man. We can never anticipate the unseen good or evil that may come upon us suddenly out of space. It may be that in the larger design of the universe, this invasion from Mars is not without its ultimate benefit for men. It has robbed us of that serene confidence in the future which is the most fruitful source of decadence. The gifts to human science it has brought are enormous, and it has done much to promote the conception of the commonweal of mankind. It may be that across the immensity of space, the Martians have watched the fate of these pioneers of theirs and learned their lesson. and that on the planet Venus they have found a securer settlement. Be that as it may, for many years yet there will certainly be no relaxation of the eager scrutiny of the Martian disk, and those fiery darts of the sky, the shooting stars, will bring with them as they fall an unavoidable apprehension to all the sons of men. The broadening of men's views that has resulted can scarcely be exaggerated. Before the cylinder fell, there was a general persuasion that through all the deep of space no life existed beyond the pretty surface of our minute sphere. Now we see further. If the Martians can reach Venus, there is no reason to suppose that the thing is impossible for men, and when the slow cooling of the sun makes this earth uninhabitable, as at last it must do, it may be that the thread of life that has begun here will have streamed out and caught our sister planet within its toils. Dim and wonderful is the vision I have conjured up in my mind of life spreading slowly from this little seedbed of the solar system throughout the inanimate vastness of sidereal space. But that is a remote dream. It may be, on the other hand, that the destruction of the Martians was only a reprieve. To them, and not to us, perhaps, it is the future ordained. I must confess the stress and danger of the time have left an abiding sense of doubt and insecurity in my mind. I sit in my study writing by lamplight, and suddenly I see again the healing valley below, set with writhing flames, and feel the house behind and about me empty and desolate. I go out into the Byfleet Road, and vehicles pass me, a butcher boy in a cart, a cab full of visitors, a workman on a bicycle, children going to school, and suddenly they become vague and unreal, and I hurry again with the artillerymen through the hot brooding silence. Of a night I see the black powder darkening the silent streets, and the contorted bodies shrouded in that layer. They rise upon me tattered and dog-bitten. They gibber and growl, and grow fiercer, paler, uglier, mad distortions of humanity at last, and I wake, cold and wretched in the darkness of the night. I go to London, and see the busy multitudes in Fleet Street and the Strand, and it comes across my mind that they are but the ghosts of the past, haunting the streets that I have seen silent and wretched, going to and fro, phantasms in a dead city, the mockery of life in a galvanized body. And strange, too, it is to stand on Primrose Hill, as I did but a day before writing this last chapter, to see the great province of houses, dim and blue through the haze of the smoke and mist, vanishing at last into the vague lower sky. To see the people walking to and fro among the flower beds on the hill, to see the sightseers about the Martian machine that stands there still, to hear the tumult of playing children, and to recall the time when I saw it all bright and clear-cut, hard and silent, under the dawn of the last great day. And, strangest of all, is it to hold my wife's hand again, and to think that I have counted her, and that she has counted me, among the dead. And that, my friends, is the end of War of the Worlds. That is how it concludes, right there, with our shell-shocked narrator, our writer of philosophy, having to kind of get over is sort of a PTSD thing. It sort of sounds like, where he's still trying to understand what happened, still trying to get over the shock of it, and still trying to go back to a normal life again. So a happy ending, but not so happy an ending, kind of a, I guess, a more of a realistic ending for this. Um, Again, if you're catching up to us a little bit later here, we had some technical difficulties in the beginning, so to this, at the moment, I'm still not entirely sure if you can even hear me, because I'm doing this on my phone instead of on the laptop, because it seemed to work, and I can't see comments on this, so I maybe end up doing this again, I guess, and in some other place where you folks can actually hear me if for some reason you can't. So I just on the off chance that maybe this is not working like I think it is, I won't spend too much more time sort of wrestling with this, except to read this little transition here. Now, in this particular volume, this is a modern library from Random House copy, and this, at the very end, is a commentary written by none other than Jules Verne. And it says here, "There is an author whose work has appealed to me very strongly from an imaginative standpoint, and whose books I have followed with considerable interest. I allude to Mr. H.G. Wells. Some of my friends have suggested to me that his work is on somewhat similar lines to my own. But here I think they err. I consider him, as a purely imaginative writer, to be deserving of very high praise. But our methods are entirely different. I have always made a point in my romances of basing my so-called inventions upon a groundwork of actual fact, and of using in their construction methods and materials which are not entirely without the pale of contemporary engineering skill and knowledge. Take, for instance, the case of the Nautilus. This, when carefully considered, is a submarine mechanism about which there is nothing wholly extraordinary, nor beyond the bounds of actual scientific knowledge. The creations of Mr. Wells, on the other hand, belong unreservedly to an age and degree of scientific knowledge far removed from the present, though I will not say entirely beyond the limits of the possible. Not only does he evolve his constructions entirely from the realm of imagination, but he also evolves the materials of which he builds them. See, for example, his story, The First Men on the Moon. You will remember that here he introduces an entirely new anti-gravitational substance to whose mode of preparation or actual chemical composition we are not given the slightest clue, nor does a reference to our present scientific knowledge enable us for a moment to predict a method by which such a result might be achieved. In The War of the Worlds, again, a work for which I confess I have great admiration, one is left entirely in the dark as to what kind of creatures the Martians really are, or in what manner they produce the wonderful heat ray with which they work such terrible havoc on their assailants. In saying this, I am casting no disparagement on Mr. Wells's methods. On the contrary, I have the highest respect for his imaginative genius. I am merely contrasting our two styles and pointing out the fundamental difference which exists between them, and I wish you clearly to understand that I express no opinion on the superiority of either the one or the other." That's it. A few paragraphs, very short, but it just talks about Jules Verne's appreciation for H.G. Wells's work and the writing that he does, which, of course, leads us to Monday, as this is our last reading for War of the Worlds. We will begin the other book, the second book that was voted on by members of the group here, and that is Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So hopefully, as of Monday, we will have any technical difficulties figured out, and we will be able to read the first 3 chapters. Again, different books have different length chapters. These are very short, And so we'll read 3 chapters on Monday, and we'll get started on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I hope you can join me there on Monday at 4 p.m., and I'm hoping everyone can see me, and we'll see you again in a few days. Have a good weekend. Thank you for joining me. Take care, everyone.